Yo, what's up? It's time for another EBM music tutorial. Today we will recreate the bass line from the Zero Ground track made by Fractions. I will use a Serum synthesizer where I will show you how to create a simple yet effective bass patch using hyperdimension and distortion. This tutorial is all about layering. I will show you how to create two different bass layers which will make your beat sound rich and full. Later I will show you how to create a simple sub-bass patch which will give your track a heavy low end. If that's not enough, I will also say a few words on how to use the reverb and a multiband compressor. My name is Marcin. I put out sound design tutorials every second Sunday. I create everything from scratch and I show you step by step how things get done. If you don't want to miss such videos, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to learn music production on a professional level fast, contact me for private music production lessons. Are you ready? Let's get to work. I have already prepared a new channel with Serum synthesizer and an appropriate melody. And the oscillator A, we will keep the sawtooth wave chosen. It's the most common wavetable for such bass sounds. Because I want to keep this bass sound sharp, I will not use the unison functionality which adds the spread which I don't want to have. The most important thing about EBM bass lines is the low pass filter where the cutoff frequency is modulated. For this modulation, I will use the first LFO. I will drag the LFO one tile towards the cutoff frequency control. Now a blue halo has appeared, which shows us the modulation range. I want to extend the modulation range. I will bring the cutoff control down and then I will extend the blue halo. We might want to adjust the LFO curve as well. Instead of a triangle wave, I will pick something reminding of a ramp wave. Sometimes this LFO sounded offbeat with the melody. That's because the LFO mode is set to off. We want to re-trigger the LFO with each MIDI note in the melody, that's why I will choose the trigger mode instead. I want to make this filter sound more aggressive, so let's make it cut even more high frequencies. I will pick a filter with a more steep curve. Another thing I can do is I can increase the filter resonance, which makes that frequency sweep even more aggressive. In the end, you can play around with both drive and fat controls, which will mainly make the bass sound louder before it goes into the effects section. This might be useful because in the effects we will use the distortion, and when using distortion plugins, the louder the input, the more crunch and distortion you get. This bass still sounds pretty simple. I will add a second oscillator. I don't want to hear the oscillator B in my bass. I want to use this oscillator only to influence the waveform I have in the oscillator A. That's why I will bring the level completely down. I will use the warping section in the oscillator A. I want to pick the frequency modulation coming from the oscillator B, which is a common functionality in analog synthesizers. I will increase the FM modulation amount in the oscillator A. I want you to listen how does the oscillator B influences the oscillator A now. I want to synchronize these both oscillators so they start every time from the same point. For this I want to turn down the random phase controls in both oscillators. And now to influence how these both oscillators interact with each other, I can play around with the initial phase. How to change the result of FM modulation. Instead of adjusting the modulation amount itself, I can pick a different wavetable and the oscillator B. I can also change the pitch of this oscillator B. We can adjust the FM modulation amount again. After adjusting all the controls in the OSC section, we can get this bass sound. Let's beef it up in the effects section. As the first effect, I will use the distortion, which is capable of adding more harmonic content to the bass, making it sound richer. The most important controls here are the distortion algorithm and the distortion amount. I want to pick something subtle, that's why I will choose a tube distortion algorithm. To make this comparison more fair, I have to adjust the volume difference between the distorted and undistorted bass sound. If I click the mix control, I will reveal the level knob, which can be used for the output gain control. For the second effect, I will use the hyper dimension. It's a combination of two effects. The hyper gives a similar result as a chorus, where the dimension gives us a little delay to the sound. I want to give my bass sound some space, that's why I will adjust the hyper effect first. To adjust the modulation amount which is happening in the background, this modulation gives you that nice space, you will want to use the detune control. Now to adjust the speed of the modulation which is happening in the background, use the rate control. The last thing you can adjust is the unison control. It tells the amount of voices which are used to create that background modulation. This control is often met in the chorus plugins as well. You can use the mix control to blend this effect with our dry bass sound. Now I can return to the dimension effect, which gives our bass sound a small delay. I will increase the mix control at first, so I can hear what does the size control do. The bass sound and the sound added with the dimension effect is separated nicely. That's because of the size control, which in fact tells the amount of delay time. To glue these both sounds together, let's decrease the size. Thanks to the mix control brought high, I could hear what I am doing with the size knob, but now I want to blend this dimension effect with the bass, and we definitely want to turn down this mix. Now I want to say a few words on the plugin order. We have used the distortion effect to enhance our bass sound, to make it sound richer and fatter. After that I have applied the hyper and dimension effect, but the distortion is placed after the hyper and dimension. It means that this distortion will enhance now both dry bass sound and the background created with the first plugin. I want to make my bass sound more sharp. So I have to place the distortion as the first effect. The last thing is the extra filter, which I will use in the end. I want to use that filter so I can cut out any low end from this layer. Later we will create a layer for mid frequencies and low ones. I don't want to mix low frequencies from different sources. That's why I want to cut any low end from this bass sound with the filter. Let's return to the oscillator section for a second. I want to add some extra noise to the bass, which will fill the high frequencies region. Now to fine-tune the noise oscillator, you can use the pitch control to change the pitch of this noise. I want to control the noise oscillator's volume to make this noise play for a very short time. We will create a very similar LFO modulation as in the LFO1, so let's press the left Alt key and drag the LFO1 tile towards the LFO2 tile. Now we have copied the LFO settings. I will drag the LFO2 tile towards the level control. Let's set the modulation range. You could hear that the LFO2 modulation was also offbeat with the melody. Let's hit the trigger mode again, and now I will create a different LFO curve. I want to use two external effects for this bass high layer. The first effect will be the utility, which will make this bass a bit more narrow. I will use the width control to manipulate the wideness of the bass sound. The second thing will be the reverb. I will use the free to download Dull Reverb 4 plugin, which gives a very transparent sound. To adjust all the settings in the reverb, I want to make the reverb hearable. So at first, let's crank up the wet control high. To not make the reverb sound too messy, I don't want to introduce too much of a mud. I will decrease the size parameter, which also tells the reverb time. Let's introduce a cool rhythm to the bassline. For this I will use the pre-delay setting, which separates the reverb from the dry sound. Now to influence the amount of low and high frequencies in the reverb, I can use the low cut and high cut knobs respectively. I have used a low cut knob to make the reverb sound lighter, but also to make the reverb blend more with the dry bass, I have used the high cut control to cut the highest frequencies. Now we can return to the wet control and adjust the volume of the reverb. This is the end of the first part of my tutorial. If you like it so far, please hit the thumbs up button, maybe write a positive comment, so I can get with this video to more beginner producers. Let's create a second bass layer which is supposed to fill the mid frequencies now. I will duplicate our existing bass patch and rename it. And there it is, a bass mid layer. In the beginning, I will remove the reverb. We have already applied the reverb in the bass high channel. We don't need a second reverb device which could give the bass more mud. In the Serum synthesizer, I will turn off the noise oscillator as well, because again, the noise is already present in the bass high layer. I will transpose this melody an octave below. I select all the notes by hitting Ctrl+A buttons, and now I press Shift and arrow down keys. To make this bass mid layer more aggressive, I will increase the FM modulation. The last thing I want to do is to blend both layers. Before we create remaining bass layers, I have to use some equalization on both of these bass sounds. I will group these two channels together. In such bass sounds, we will deal with lots of mid frequencies which we might want to cut. This is the equalization curve I will apply to both bass layers. I showed you a while ago how we were listening to the bass sound to the individual frequencies with the Voxenko span frequency analyzer. By such a listening, I have picked two frequencies I want to cut. You don't have to worry about cutting too much of these frequencies. As you can see, the gain values are pretty high, -10 decibels and -7. The only thing I want you to notice is the rather high Q value. I want to make this equalizer cut the resonating frequencies in a precise way. Let's play the bass and turn on these equalizer bands one after another. Now we can create a third bass layer. I have already cloned the channel. Let's call this one bass low. Again, I want to take off the reverb first. I want to use the same melody I have used for the bass mid channel. So we transpose the whole melody one octave below. The remaining adjustments will be done in Serum. I want to turn off the first LFO, which modulates our filter cutoff frequency. Let's click the right mouse button and click Remove All Destinations. We can't hear the bass sound because the cutoff knob is set too low. The bass is going through the low pass filter, but the noise is still hearable well. I will route the noise oscillator to the filter. I said I want to have a constant bass sound, but in the original melody I have a break in the middle. We might want to extend this MIDI note. In the end, again, we can adjust the stereo width for this bass low layer with the width control in the utility, and we can use a second utility to match the volume with our previous bass layers. Three bass layers are created, but still the lowest frequencies are not present. I have to create a new MIDI channel with another Serum instance. I will use a sine wave only. I can already head up to the basic shapes wavetable and pick a sine wave. I will draw now the bassline for the sub-bass sound. We will play this sound only on a single pitch. Look at the melody I have used for our main bass sound. The root note is equal to G0. This will be the frequency or the pitch I want to use in my sine wave sound. Currently, the sub-bass sound is playing with a constant volume all the time. Very soon, I will add the kick drum to this project. And, as I have said before, I don't want to mix low frequencies from a few sources. That simply makes the final mix sound muddy, the low end is not precise. We have to modulate the volume of this sine wave. Let's drag the LFO1 tile towards our level control of the bass. Let's draw an appropriate LFO curve. We will start from a flat line. Now we will create a space for the kick drum. I will create another point. Let's bring these two beginning points down. For more rhythm and groove in the low end, for example, I can make a volume rise in the end. There are some clicks in this sub-bass sound, but don't worry about them. They will complement the kick drum sound. The volume of the sub-bass channel also has to be adjusted. I'm using another utility for that. Now it's time to add that kick drum. I have created a new MIDI channel with a drum rack loaded. And I have picked, let's say, a random trancy kick drum. I will use here a very simple processing which consists of a single saturation plugin. This is SGA1566 saturation unit, very powerful. We will use the gain parameter to beef up this kick drum. As always, I am using a utility to match the volume to the remaining sounds. The last thing in this tutorial is a group processing all the sounds we have just created. So let's select all the channels and group them with Ctrl+G buttons. I want to use on the whole group a multiband compressor. The sound coming from the kick and bass is rather dull. The multiband dynamics is an advanced effect which allows you to compress the percussion sounds in a more flexible way than a classic compressor or a limiter. And I will load an OTT preset in the multiband dynamics effect. All the frequencies coming from this percussion are splitted into 3 frequency ranges, and all these 3 frequency ranges are compressed in a different way. The magic behind this particular OTT preset is following. At first, the high frequencies and low frequencies are much louder than the mid frequencies in the output. This is something which you also do when mastering your tracks. Often the only thing in the EQ you do is you increase the high-end volume to make the track brighter, but also you bring up the low end to make the bass heavier. The OTT compressor brings out more details out of the sound. That is because the high frequencies are compressed much heavier than the mid frequencies. I don't want to make this video too long. Instead of explaining each particular control in the multiband dynamics effect, I will show you how you can adjust the OTT preset on your own. The first thing we might want to adjust is the frequency distribution between the frequency ranges. For example, if I want to have more mid frequencies in my sound, I have to route more of these mid frequencies towards the bottom compressor. That's because the bottom compressor the amount of high frequencies which are squashed and being brought up front to the beat can be controlled with the crossover frequency Foltis filter. This compressor squashes the whole percussion way too much. To control globally the amount of compression added, use the amount knob in the bottom right section. Another thing I can adjust is the volume of particular frequency ranges. I think the mid frequencies are too loud after being compressed, so I can reach for the output section to make them quieter. In the end, let's listen to the percussion with and without adjusted multiband compression. And this will be everything for today's tutorial. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button and share this video with your friends. In next 2 weeks we will look at hard techno. We will see how to recreate a beat from one of the Nico Moreno track. Thanks for watching and see you next time.